Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. Thank you so much for coming out to Daily Cyber episode number 275. Today is going to be an Ask Me Anything. We're going to go through just different areas of cybersecurity. You guys can ask me any questions you want. Had a guest scheduled for today, last minute, again with the guests that I'm working with or trying to get into interview. A lot of them are in senior positions, incident response, things along that line. So incidents come up and they have to cancel last minute. So all good. Today I'm going to be open to answering any of your questions. And I got a few topics I want to talk about with you guys so that we can just have a good conversation about cybersecurity and kind of what's going on in the industry. So grab a coffee, grab a tea, and let's hack at it. So everyone, this has been a busy week. I don't know how you guys are doing. There's a lot going on in the world, as we know. A lot going on with cybersecurity in the industry. I'm seeing the chat right now on Discord that people are talking about, like, RTO and looking at work and just things that are going on in the industry. So we'll talk a little bit about that and kind of what I'm seeing is going on in employment, especially when it looks at like Ontario and Canada. I know currently right now they're saying we're on the biggest unemployment rate of all times in Canada right now. And I think the challenge with that is that we have an influx of, immigrants. We have, problems with our economy, what's going on with the financial situation. So larger organizations are cutting back. So people getting laid off. I know for myself, I got laid off a couple months ago. So, and then, fortunately, with us in the cybersecurity industry, if you have good skill sets, soft skills and technical skills, you can potentially find something fairly quick because there's a need for expertise, for the need for that value. So I think it's really important to have these conversations, keep up with what's going on with the current industry and just really what's going on in your day to day. I mean, I think it's really important, so like one of the things I wanted to cover today, and I'm monitoring the chat. So you guys know, if you guys have any questions, just let me know. Cybersecurity talent shortage and burnout crisis. I mean, I'm seeing as I go through working with different organizations, their hiring practice, trying to find that unicorn, that amazing person that understands threat intelligence, understands incident response, understands policy and governance, understands how to do proper documentation, going through that process, understands a corporate environment, how to work with a corporate environment, because there's that soft skill aspect of it. Like, I know for myself, and sometimes I have to pull back, is that you want to drive initiatives, you want to drive deliverables because you know how essential it is. But you have other stakeholders, other people in the business that have other objectives or have other visions and viewpoints of how they want to do it. So sometimes you have to slow back down to go faster, to collaborate with your team members. Right? And there's sometimes and I find myself pushing forward, right? And I talk about that, like having that talent to be able to do that, having those conversations, being able to take in information, understand other points of view, and then trying to articulate your point of view that aligns to what they're thinking, or at least educates them on the importance of your process, your vision, what your implementation, right? And why you think it's equally as important or should be one of the top priorities, right? If it's you're working on the top 5 or top 10, the reason why you feel it should be part of that top 5. And it's really important to have those conversations and be able to articulate in a way that's supportive. It's empathetic, that you understand your team members and where they're coming from. And also you're understanding it's aligned to business objectives, not security objectives, right? Especially when you come from like a position where you're working upwards, upstream, where you're working with directors, VPs, C-suite. They have more focus on business objectives and understand security is important, but how does it align to the bigger business objective? And if you can do that, I mean, you're golden, right? If you can align your security control on how it's going to help improve that business objective, or, we talked about reduce liability, reduce risk, improve profitability, right? Reduce costs, right? Things along that line, because you're talking about integration and automation. Like, all these things will help you become better at sharing your vision and helping mature the security posture. Now, the challenge is that when you get experts like this with such strong skill sets, what happens is they get divided out into multiple pieces of the pie. Meaning, oh, can you do this project? But also, can you do this project? Also, can you do this deliverable? And can you do this deliverable? So instead of being focused on 3 or 4 areas, now they're focused on 5 areas, maybe 8 areas, maybe 10 areas, right? And it starts to become challenging because those individuals with that skill set start to burn out because they're working 8, 10, 12, 15, 18 hours a day, 5 to 8, 5 to 7 days a week. And they're just pushing, right? Because there's things that need to be done. And security, anyone new to the industry that hasn't been in the industry and hasn't worked there, you guys know, especially if you've been in IT, it's constantly changing, constantly evolving. One of the questions I've been getting this week was about compliance, GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, and how do we build out a program that's scalable, right? And I said one of the challenges, and they were talking about automation and innovation, and get that, and you get these questions, and you get the answers, and you put them in the database or a learning an LLM, right? And he gets it, and the LLM answers it and does all that. And I'm like, that's great, but it has to be ongoing. It has to be managed ongoing because the environment changes. How we answer the questions change. How, the questions that are being submitted are generally not, from my experience, uniform because each organization has their own way of asking that type of question. I'll give you an example. Say, for example, you're a company, you're asking me, do I have a SIM, like a security incident event management tool in place? Some will just ask that yes or no question. Some will ask, how do you manage your SIM? Some will ask, do you have evidence of the SIM? So they'll want, screen captures of logs, right? So all that question is really around SIM, but they're going to ask in different ways. Well, you have to train the automation to be able to answer specifically and then modify, but it's ongoing. It's not set it and forget it. And no security program is set it, forget it. Which brings me back to the point of like burnout and really focusing on what we need to do. There's going to be a balance of how to use automation, AI technology to be more efficient, with the caveat that it has to be managed properly. It has to be evaluated. You have to do your due diligence. You have to make sure the answers and the information and what you're using the tool for is giving you the right output, right? So, and that takes talent. It takes individuals that know their job and their role. And also takes people, from my recommendation, that know how to balance out the automation and innovation, the security controls, and the maturity of the security controls and how they're actually functioning, working. I talked to a client today about vulnerability management. I said, as you build a program, you've got to have reporting to evaluate the success of the program so that are you seeing any progress and reducing the vulnerabilities, right? Especially when you're looking at patch management, you're looking at any type of scanning you're doing. Do you see an improvement in the program? Or do you have a certain baseline that's going to be ongoing? If you see the average, and I'll use this patch management, say it's a larger organization, you patch Tuesday, the average patching that you're going to get on patch Tuesday or Wednesday and Thursday as you start to run that report and potential vulnerabilities because of security might be 50 to 100 to 500. But that's acceptable because you're running the patch program. Once you do that, if you had patch Tuesday, you did testing, you did all that, and say the following the Friday or Monday, say it's Friday, you do the patching because again, you want maybe do it over the weekend just because you want to make sure if there's anything breaks, you have time to roll back. So say patch Tuesday, you do a few tests on the patch, make sure they're valid. There's not going to be any issues. You run the patch on Friday, you run the report on Monday, and you see that 500 drop, right? That 500 drop to 50, right? Because you got all those, vulnerabilities patched, and the 50 are other things that you need to do. Maybe the patch didn't go, maybe it's a manual process you need to do, whatever that may be. But if you don't have proper reporting, you don't know how the program's doing, and you have to see it over time and distance. I really think this is important to think about as you're getting into your security career and as you're evolving is how are you building this out? How are you building out your program? How are you working with your teams? Be it up market, senior leadership, executives, to downstream, to partners. How are you collaborating with them to get the best effort? And are you being collaborative or are you being adversarial, right? I'm seeing more experts be more collaborative because we understand the stress. We understand the real world situation. So when someone says, give me some time to get to it, the next question I normally see is, how many days do you need? A couple of days, a week? Do you got other projects? They're trying to better understand versus I used to see is, no, I need it by Friday. I need it by Friday morning. Not caring what the other individual has on their plate, other objectives, other projects, other incidents. So I'm starting to see more compassion and empathy on each professional and what we're working through. And I think that's going to help to balance out at least our colleagues' burnout. But we also have to look at just ours, right? And one thing I was talking to a colleague before the stream was because the Canadian market is so challenging right now, people that have jobs are trying to maintain them, even though if it's stressful, if it's a burnout, whatever that may be, because they know the employment market right now is challenging. And I'll give you an example for Canada. I don't know about, again, where you guys are from the world. I know right now a lot of my colleagues are getting employed by U.S. companies. The Canadian market right now is more challenging, and that's at least what I'm seeing, and they're getting employed by U.S. companies, I'll say on average, just because there's more growth, more bandwidth. The economy is doing a little bit better than the Canadian market right now. So stuff to really think about, when you're looking at the Canadian market, you're looking at your career, you look at your talent. And then the other thing I want to add, and just kind of, on my soapbox here, is making sure that you have not only the book theoretical knowledge, you have applied knowledge. And probably going to ask, how do I get applied knowledge? Be it setting up your own lab, volunteering at places, working for non-for-profits, right, and doing consultations from anywhere from co-op to, actually charging, these people for like a fraction of your time. So if your time's worth $100 an hour, charge them 50. Again, it's the reason to get experience versus actual revenue. Right. So what happens is you can take that to market and say, look, I've actually done this work. I've actually set this up. I've actually done that. I've already set up firewalls, endpoint protection, DLP. I've done it. I've seen the challenges. I understood how to overcome them. I've got them into a functional state where they're maintenance and reporting and help them to tweak and fine tune it. And I've done that for several clients. I've done that for several organizations. That now speaks volumes to your experience, because theoretically, and I'm dealing this with myself, theoretically, there's a lot of knowledge I know, especially when on the technical side, because I haven't been on the technical side in a while, but I'm finding that I'm having to set up labs. I would just set up a lab not too long ago, and now going back through the technical configurations and seeing it's not that easy. This script, it doesn't work as it should. You have to modify the script. You have to do it in a certain sequence. But if you look at the white papers, it's just supposed to be click, 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 click. That's how it's supposed to work. But it doesn't. And then you look at forums and you talk to colleagues and they say, oh, by the way, you have to make this change, this modification. You have to put this switch in. You have to do that. And now it works. So things to think about as you're going through your career. Now, again, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I'm monitoring the chat right now. But I think it's really important to take care of yourself on your career development, but also if you're in your career, watch for burnout and signs for burnout. I'm going to say this, and it's all a reminder for you guys. You guys already know this, but isolating yourself, right? If you're isolating yourself, you're too tired, you're too fatigued to do anything, you don't feel like, after work, you want to veg, you want to watch TV, play video games, whatever, and you just don't want to do anything. That is sometimes signs of burnout. You're not working out, you're not eating healthy, you're not sleeping properly, right? Or you're oversleeping, you're waking up exhausted, right? You sleep for 8 to 10 hours, but you're still exhausted. You're gaining weight, right? You're starting to gain weight. You're starting to see extra 5, 10, 15, 20 pounds gain on. These are signs that might not be front and center and I'm going to say for myself, I know in these situations, my head goes down. Head goes down, focus at work. That's all I do. Work, and I focus on. And then I miss the signs of burnout, right? I miss that I'm oversleeping. Like I'm going to bed at like 8 o'clock and I'm waking up at like 7, right? I'm like, why am I sleeping so much? I'm sleeping over the weekends, right? I don't feel like doing anything. Those are signs for me. I'm gaining an extra 5 to 10 pounds, right? I don't feel like working out. I'm short. Like not in sense of size, but with people, I don't have the capacity to listen. Right? And I find I'm urgently trying to answer the question or go through it. So these are some signs to be mindful and do a self-evaluation, kind of go, is that happening to me? Am I going through that right now? Do I have some of these symptoms that maybe I need to double check and just see, do I need to slow down? Do I need to kind of do some self-care? So something to think about. The next thing I want to talk about is like shadow IT, SaaS sprawl, hidden security risks. One thing I'm starting to see, and I've seen it since I've been in security, right? And you look at, I remember working for the Ontario government and finding people under their keyboard, putting their passwords, right? Because what happens, it's too complex. It's too hard, right? And they're trying to find ways of not storing their password or not doing this or not having a complex password. And they're trying to find workarounds to circumvent the security controls, right? And then I've seen like where people will try to go on the guest network and do work off the guest network versus off the actual corporate network, which has security controls because they can't get to their sites that they need to. But if they go on the guest network, they can, right, while they work, and they potentially get access to some of their SaaS software and solutions, right? I feel my security hat, and I'm putting that on right now. I feel what we have to do is a better job of education, doing proof of concepts, hearing the feedback from different departments and stakeholders, like why do they feel this is not going to work, or are they going to use it or not? What's the success? What's the adoption rate? Kind of look at that. Then test it in their environment. See if you find any red flags, individuals that are trying to circumvent it or logging tickets, having issues, and then seeing what's going to be potentially the success rate of the whole program in that department, those individuals, and then see what needs to be done. Is it re-education? Do you need to get HR involved? Like what needs to be done to make sure that you're improving the security posture? And there's a self-evaluation that we have to do as security experts. Is the security controls too controlling, too secure, that's actually hindering them from doing their work, right? And I've seen that the other side as well, is where you lock everything down, where you limit access, the separation of duties, least privileges, and you put all this in place, but they can't function. It's really hard for them to do their job. So there's a fine balance, and they talk about, CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. There's a fine harmony that you have to come into place with all three to make sure they function and you don't impact the business. All right. So this is why I see a lot of times when you look at like shadow IT, right, and people trying to circumvent security, it's because that conversation is either one side or the other. Security says you have to do it. Companies saying you have to do it. Employees are saying, no, we're not going to do it. Right. And there are all these people in the different, areas having their own experience where it needs to be more collaborative. The risks. I mean, you guys know with shadow IT, especially when you're looking at shadow IT from a corporate view, People with more privileges, meaning higher access, more access to different environments, data, information, if they are circumventing the controls, the potential for them to get compromised and the impact being higher is a high risk for the organization. So they're the type of people we need to have adopt, right? And these are the ones that we want to make sure. Now, the other thing is, and I talk about this, I'm going to just jump into the next topic. And again, let me know if you guys have any questions. I'm going to talk about this one. This is the next one that really kind of aligns to what I'm looking at, like shadow IT, and then going to third-party risks. I'm seeing more and more the due diligence on both sides of the organization, vendors and partners to an organization, and vice versa, that whole life cycle and partnership. I used to see like questionnaires where like 10, 15, 20 questions. And I'm getting organizations that are talking to me and saying, okay, you know what? Can't we make this simpler? Can't we make it easier? Can't we make it more efficient? Efficiency, I don't have a problem with. Simpler, I have challenges with. Because what happens is when you have downstream liability, meaning say it's an MSP or MSSP, they're managing their clients. They're down here and they're managing their clients. If that MSP gets compromised and the access they have to the clients now is an open access point from the threat actor moving laterally from their environment to that client, is downstream liability. Well, if we don't do our due diligence to validate the security controls and how they manage it and do a thorough job of that MSSP, you start getting this. Well, that wasn't my fault. That was your security. But that you were supposed to have the secure environment, but you didn't ask us, and you didn't do this, and you're like, okay, what's going on? And I've been on calls and incident calls from our like incident response, talking to organizations, hearing that conversation of people pointing fingers, and really thinking to myself as an advisor, why didn't they validate it as a team? Why didn't they go through the due diligence together, back and forth, and make sure they ask the right questions and then have evidence to support that they're actually doing and implementing and managing those controls, right? And then validate, and then go through, depending on the size of the organization, the potential revenue and risk, set up more consistent audits, right, to validate that actual controls or the third-party risk, right, to make sure everything's been implemented. So, for example, some organizations do SOC 2 Type 2. They do that annually. Great. So they got an outside party that comes in, goes through their due diligence, validates their controls, and makes sure that that's fairly extensive, especially when you look at these organizations that come in. That's great to get a copy of that. Get a copy of that, ask some questionnaires, and then line it to what you need. And then what happens is as you go through that, you have a baseline of the understanding of the security, right, and how that's going to work, right? And you want to know, you want to ask some good hard questions of like, how is that security control going to impact us? How does that work with our systems? How does that work with communication? How does it work with data flow? How does it work? How does it work? How, right? When you feel comfortable that it's at a baseline of security. Now, if you don't know, and this is a good, a good place to be. If you're like, I don't know, then bring in an expert that does know or knows how to ask those right questions and validate it. And then what happens is you at least get an understanding of what you're going to make a requirement, what you're going to accept. That's acceptable risk. Don't worry. And I'll use an example. An acceptable risk would be the client has access, to, just trying to think, access to our policies. We gave them access to some of our policies. They have our acceptable use policy. They have our business continuity plan, our incident response, our disaster recovery. They're saying they're going to store it in a secure area. We're going to kind of accept that. We're good to go. They validate in an email. They're going to store that in a secure area. We're good. Now, that's kind of an acceptable risk. If that gets out, gets published, they get compromised, it happens. It's going to impact the organization, but it's not going to have an incident, in the sense that you might have to update your policies, you might have to make some modifications, some changes, you have to make sure that it's up to date. And again, most of these policies are up to date quarterly, if not annually, because the environment keeps changing. Now, something that is like a requirement, right? Encryption, right? Data at rest, data in motion, right? Making sure there's encryption, and it's like a high standard, like 256. Are they using TLS like 1.3? Are they using HTTPS? Are they using these secure protocols for communication? Are they using two-factor authentication, right? Do they use password managers, right, to secure their passwords and things along that line? So all of these things might be requirement. If they don't do it, it should be a showstopper, right? It should be a point where you're like, yeah, no, it's a no-go, right? It's a showstopper. You need to get implement. Once you get implement, you validate you do, then we'll have this conversation. And I think it's important for us to think as security professionals, we don't work independently anymore because of the partnerships and the relationships and the connectivity that we have with other organizations. There's a spider web, I'm going to call it a spider web relationship with your vendors, your partners, your SaaS solutions, and things along that line. I was talking to a colleague, and this popped in my mind, and they were saying that for some reason they were using a booking site, right? So basically, and there was a clinic that was using a booking site that used a software solution that the clients were able to go into this platform. It's a front end solution, look at the calendar, book their appointments, see the practitioner's availability, and go in and book it. Well, the organization was coming to me and saying, we're seeing like these threat actor, right, calendar invites. I'm like, okay, give me an example. Like, is it coming through the portal? Like, no, it's not coming through the portal. It's being sent directly to my calendar, but my calendar is not public. My calendar is not open. No one should see it. And the only application that's tied to this is this one application. Other than that, my calendars only can be accessed from myself creating appointments, sending them out, and sharing them. Other than that, no one should be able to access my calendar. It's completely blank. And this was part of the organization. So then I went through, helped them draft an email to send to the third party that manages that calendar solution. And they haven't got back yet, but from my understanding, there potentially might be a bug, right, or some sort of access point that's open that they're not aware of. But that comes down to third party liability, because now I don't know in that clinic, and this is where I told them they should disable that right now across the board and not give access, because they don't know to what extent that now gives access to their environment. Is it just to the calendar? If it is, that's great. If it's not, and you guys have seen this as well, when you look at plugins, when they say plugins or extensions, they go, we need access to your calendar, your contacts, your photos, and it lists all these things they have access to. That was my concern for them. So I have a meeting with them I'm going to follow up with, but that's third-party liability. That's third-party risk, right? So let me know if you have any questions, kind of on my soapbox about that, but it's really important to look at our due diligence around that, our due diligence around third parties, because it's important to make sure the relationship that you're working with is all secure, right? And I think it's something that more and more organizations are thinking about. More and more organizations are having a compliance officer, or they're getting their security people to run that, and they're seeing the extent. And I mean, security is just not the technical controls. It's a piece of all this: technical, administrative, operational. So you have to have your head around all these different areas. So I think it's essential to really kind of think about that as you're going through your security journey. Next, I want to talk about, kind of look at some of my notes here. So cloud providers, SaaS solutions, you're looking at Google Works, Azure, Amazon, things along that line. I'm speaking to the choir here because you guys know this. I'm sharing this for anyone that might be new to figuring out the security profile and solutions and things when it comes to cloud. You have to do your due diligence. You have to ask the right questions. You have to look over the security program and the relationship you have with that security platform. If it's hosted, you're hosting a platform as a service, software as a service, right? Whatever that may be, you need to validate what security controls you need to be in place, because a lot of the times it's shared security responsibility. I'll use an example, platform as a service. So platform as a service, if you went in and said, hey, look, I need to get the infrastructure set up at Amazon or Azure. I want the infrastructure, but I'm going to put in the applications. I'm going to put the software. I'm going to do the patches. I'm going to do all that. They will be in control of the data center, the hardware, and the security on that side, and the access to that data center, right? Anything else over and above the hardware is going to be my responsibility. My responsibility as the organization to make sure that's secure. And that's where you get that shared security responsibility. And I have to see, what does that take? Do I have to set up firewalls? Do I have to set up more security? Do I have to have encryption? Do I have to set up the right profiles? Like, all these things you have to think about and plan ahead of time. Some things I've seen, and I'm going to be gentle here. It makes me curious how some of these organizations go in and look at it, and talked about CIA, confidentiality, integrity, and availability. They look at availability and accessibility, right? Like, oh my God, put this application in and everyone's doing it. Look at the innovation. Look what can it do. And then they get it from development into production, and they look at on the production side and they go, oh, someone just did a third-party assessment on it, and they did a vulnerability scan, and all of a sudden we have all these vulnerabilities. Oops. Okay, so now we have to sprint internally to fix those and make sure there's not an incident in between that. So I want you to take that in for a second. You set up a solution that you provide to your clients that you're not aware if there is vulnerabilities, or you feel it's secure, but you haven't done any validation. You might have done secure practice, but there's no vulnerability scan or pen testing or fuzzing or things that have done to, complete that circle. And then you put it out to the public. And then the public comes back, your clients come back, your customers, and they say, oh, by the way, I found 50, 60, 100 sub ones, priority one, vulnerabilities, 0 days, critical vulnerabilities. Now you're sprinting to make sure there's not an incident. This is why it's so important to plan out your project, your development, put your environment in a development area and test it thoroughly, not only quality control and functional, but also security testing and your due diligence. Then from there, look at taking it to market. I say that and I share that because I think it's so important to make sure that the due diligence is done, because you never want to be that organization that's been in a compromise. That we've been compromised, we've been attacked. We had a threat actor, move into our environment. We don't know what they've taken. You don't want to have those conversations if you don't have to, if you've done your due diligence. Just look at my notes here. Common misconfiguration causes are, open, S3 buckets, weak identity access management. And this comes back down to your auditing, right? Least privileges, making sure you understand that who needs access to what. And then through the development, you might have a little bit more of an open hierarchy of users and access. But as you start to, look at production, you start to reduce that. Who actually needs access, and what access do they need, and what's the least amount they need, or most amount? Well, what's the highest level of privileges you have in the environment, and how can you restrict them to the least amount of people? That's what I'm talking about. Right? Because there's going to be some people that need that access, but you want to make sure it's reduced to the minimal amount of people that have great security controls in place. Things that you guys are aware of, MFA, encryption, like encryption, right? We can't talk enough about that, making sure you're using encryption protocols for communication, right? For any type of front end and public, site. Having logging, right? Making sure that you have logs that are properly logging, and you fine tune your alerting, right? Not just you have a dump of logs and then no one's looking at them. That's another thing that is a challenge that I've seen too, is people have security logs and they're putting in maybe into certain solutions like a SIEM, but their monitoring is limited because the number of resources, they haven't tuned it, they haven't worked with the right team, whatever that may be. And then what you find is that they have an incident and they go back through the logs and figure out this compromise happened weeks, if not months ago, just no one saw it. No, and it didn't trigger properly. So making sure you have the right logs and alerting set up and you're monitoring it properly ongoing. Let's see, what else do we want to talk about? So cybersecurity leadership in the age of AI. I think it's really important right now to think about the evolution of AI, right? Because more and more organizations are looking at how to implement it. Other part of that is the applications that most organizations are starting to incorporate AI in some form or another, right? We see it on Microsoft, we see it in Teams, we see it on that where you see like a note-taking app. Also will pop up and it's an AI tool, right? Someone's recording the meeting, taking notes, doing all that. But the question comes, as a cybersecurity leader, has anyone done their due diligence? Has anyone gone through and validated, what's that application? Where's the data being stored? How's the data being utilized? What's the company's or organization's policy on data privacy, data security, leveraging that data for their own usage? What type of data do they have access to? Do they have access to all data, right? Or do they have access to certain data? Do they have access to the system as well? Like some of these applications will have a layer of access to your camera, your microphone, right? They'll look at having access to certain drivers. Like it just can go deeper and deeper, which that information now can be recorded to that, AI solution. And then the question is, depending on how they're using it, or is it just like type of metadata they're collecting? You have to do that validation, right? I know there's one client I'm working with right now. We're going through that. We're going through a questionnaire of their partner, and one of the questions come up is like how they're using the data, how they're working with it, right? And it's so essential to understand that, because if they provide a policy and then you start seeing how and I'll use this as an example. They say that their third parties will have access to that data for their use. Now the question is now what's their policy? Downstream liability. You to that partner now shares that data to another partner, but you don't have control of that other partner, the third partner in that chain. You don't know their policy. You don't know how they're going to use it. So now your information is being shared with that partner to their partner, and maybe outside. And I remember trying to think of the software. I don't remember offhand, but when I was working at, I think it was Go Secure, we were doing scans on organizations' websites and security and looking at what they have. And we found out by some of the code, it wasn't code created by that organization, right? So as a developer would say, yeah, we created all the code, we built out the website in HTTPS or HTTP, or what was it? I'm trying to think of the programming. Oh, come to me. But they were telling me they did all the coding. But when we reviewed the code using this tool, it said, no, this is similar code to that was in from Russia. So then when we asked them, they said, yeah, we use consultants. We use consultants to help us. And we're like, where'd you use these consultants? Well, Fiverr, OpenDesk, things along that line. And we were like, okay, so how do we know there's not any back doors? How do we know there's the security? How? It starts to open the question. So AI is so important, not only on what data you're putting in there, right? And, making sure that the AI tool is not distributing your data, confidential data, any security information, any, information of the environment. We also have to make sure there's accountability through that process, right? That's not like, sorry, that's just what it is. It's part of our master service agreement. And if you didn't read it, you accepted it. That's just what it is. Well, if you're at that stage where these sections are in their contracts and you have to make a decision, my security mindset is I would go and be more secure versus looking at, is this the best innovation solution? Let's put it in place versus what's our risk? What's the challenge? If they do get compromised, what does that impact? Does it impact the business alone? Does it impact the business and our clients? Does it impact our business, our clients, and our partners, our stakeholders? Like how deep can this go? And these are the questions we need to ask then to educate the organization on how to do it properly, or maybe even going slower, right? In the sense of this AI solution is not the right fit. Let's see if we can find 3 other competitors that might be doing a better way of securing and hardening and follow with our security guidelines. And then, of course, it might be able to implement it. But if it doesn't, I'm the first one to say I wouldn't recommend using it. And if they do it at their own risk. So really things to think about as you're looking at AI. And I want to be very clear. I'm not against AI, not at all. I'm more in the favor of secure business practice, security practice of using the tool. An example, like I study Kali, which is, Filipino martial art. And you look at, I can use a knife for cooking and creating great things. I can use a knife for self-defense, right, and protecting myself. It's still a tool, right? It depends how I use it. I see AI right now as a great tool in innovation. It's how we're using it and how we're slowly starting to be more mature and use it in a way that's going to be the best for us, for our security, for our business, for our partners, for our clients. All right. Now, again, if you guys have any questions, let me know. I know that's a little bit of a soapbox, but again, I want to be very clear. I'm not against AI. I work with partners and clients that use AI, right? But they use it in a secure way. Right? They understand that this is the infancy stage. This is where the tools are being developed. The boundaries and security are being optimized and improved. So I'm not against using it, just how do we use it properly? So coming up on 15 minutes left in the stream right now. Let me know if you guys have any questions in the chat. The last thing I'm going to bring up, just for the last 5 minutes. Just gonna, So I'm going to add this, something like life lessons, right? vCISO life lessons, takeaways, pro tips, things I'd recommend for you guys. Tip number 1, make sure as a vCISO, security expert, you're organized with your documentation. The more organized you are with your process and your documentation, the easier it's going to be for you, especially when you get more projects, deeper into projects, more security controls. When you're doing more, the more organized you are, the easier it is going to be able to manage it. Now, it might take a little bit of effort to create the foundation. And I remember it was Eben Pagan talked about this. He was talking about, and I was one of those, what was it? Get Altitude. There was the program. It was talking about building a high rise. How deep do they build into the ground before they start building up? And he asked the audience, he's asking, okay, so, what do you guys know? Like, how deep does, a builder build into the ground before they start building up the skyscraper? People were saying, 100 feet, 200 feet, and they're just throwing out numbers. He says a third of the building is underground. And we're like, okay, I was listening to it. And he goes, because they have to build such a strong foundation so they can build so high, they have to have that set up. That stuck with me, that knowing when I build out security programs, GRC programs, vulnerability management programs, is having that strong foundation that can scale creates a great, strong program, creates a great operation plan. Doing the due diligence up front is going to make it so much easier as you start to progress. But if you don't do that up front, when you have to go back and fix it, it might be 10 times as hard because you have to rejig everything. Now, there is times, it's going to happen. You go through the foundation principles, you build out a program, you do that, and someone's going to say, we need to modify it. It's going to be innovation, optimization, senior leadership, whatever that means, saying, I want to make this tweak, I want to make this change. And it might start to go, well, that change affects these 4 areas. It's going to be a bigger change than just that. We can do it and rebuild, but we just have to do it properly. And it's going to happen, right? No matter how much you plan. So tip number 2, VC lessons, is be dynamic, be flexible, right? Don't be so rigid, right? I know, and I'm talking to myself too. I've been there in the places where it's got to be this way. There's the only way to do it. That's the only way. Is it, right? Is it aligned to the relationship and everything else? If I do it a different way or a little bit different from what I'm thinking, does it increase the risk? Does it increase the liability? No? Okay, well, let's do it whatever way is going to work, that's going to be collaborative, as long as it's aligned to, and this is what I taught, is aligned to being able to do it properly, right? We're not cutting corners. We're not trying to do it, fast. That's going to create issues later. As long as we're aligned to that, I'm willing to make dynamic changes, but I don't want to cut corners that's going to potentially get us in challenges later because we missed a step. We missed something that's essential, right? I'm open and I'm willing to work to be more dynamic now. And this is something I've worked on life lessons, is to do that and be more collaborative. It helps to build your career. It helps to be collaborative. Next thing is, don't take your work home with you, right? One of the things I'm learning, and I go through my peaks and valleys of, and my cycles, is sometimes when I'm finished work, I'm not finished work mentally, right? I'm like, oh, by the way, I have to do that. I have to follow up with this. And then that has to be done, and I have to get that report out. I have to do those 5 changes. I have to get that information. I have to do X, Y, and Z, whatever that may be. And then I'm up at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm up at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'm thinking about it. Do your best to not bring work home. When you're done work, try to be finished work. Try to have that work-life balance. Now, easier said than done. Someone that worked in instant response, you kind of like, okay, it's 5 o'clock, I'm done, woohoo, but I'm still on call, but I'm done. And then you get the 11 o'clock call saying, hey, can you be on a scoping call? Which then runs you to like 3 o'clock in the morning, right? Do your best. There's some positions where you're on call, where you're going to be called in potentially, but do your best to kind of shut down. Or if you're on call, when you're not on call and you're on your kind of loo time or off, be completely off, right? Get that rest, right? Make sure you shut down your mind, because like I said, I've seen it both ways, where, and for myself, where you get there and you're just completely done, right? You're completely done and you're just exhausted. You're exhausted about like working, thinking, all that. And challenge with that is, and I want to draw this out, the challenge with that is when you're in your next meeting, you're not fully there, right? You're tired, you're frustrated, you're answering questions quick, you might make mistakes, whatever that may be. And all of a sudden you realize, shoot, like, and I've done this. I got off calls and going, did I answer that correctly? No, I should have said this, this, and this. All right. Let me send out an email. Let me clarify. Thanks for that question. I might have misspoke. I might have said something incorrectly. I actually meant this X, Y, and Z. Right. I actually meant that. This is what should be done. This is what happened. And I caught myself after the fact. Well, it's because I'm exhausted. I'm tired. I'm not mentally there. Right. So things to think about for yourselves, and this goes back to the burnout question, all that, is just making sure that you can be present in these conversations, because a lot of times with security people, you're put on the spot. And that's going to be my comment number 2. A lot of times in security questions, you're put on the spot. Brandon, what do you think about that? Brandon, what's going on with that? Oh my God, we had an incident. What happened? Like, and you kind of have to like knee-jerk response. That's the time to breathe. Sorry, let me clarify. Ask some good questions to kind of maybe level set, ground yourself. Okay, hold on. So what's, can you get me up to date? That's one I ask a lot of times. Can you catch me up to date? I'm not sure. I fully understand the situation. So what happens is they'll go through, oh, this happened, this happened, this happened. Okay. And then what exactly have we done up to this point? Okay. Now I can answer, okay, what about this? Have we looked at this? Have we done that? I can start looking at different areas, versus I found myself when I first got into security shooting from the hip. Oh, we need to do this. Oh my God, you can't do that. Oh, this happened. This happened. And then I realized I got myself into situations where they've already done that. They already knew about that. They've already worked on that and closed that out. Right? They're 5 steps ahead. And I'm like just getting started, and I'm asking questions that they already know. And it's kind of fun. This just came to my head. Anyone here has had their internet go down, and you call your internet service provider, especially, I'm going to use this one at home, right? Especially at home. And you've done it. We're technical people. We've rebooted the modem. We've gone through the testing. We've done all that. And you get on the phone with them. And they go, hi, sir. We're going to go through some troubleshooting steps. Can you reboot your modem and leave it off for, a minute to 5 minutes so the cache can refresh and all that? You're like, I did that. Can you do it again? Okay. Can you check and make sure you're getting an IP address? I'm not getting an IP address. Well, do you see any lights in the modem? No, I don't see any lights in the modem. That's what I mentioned. That it's completely down. I think there's a problem with the network. Okay, sir, have you checked the cable? Yes, I've checked the cable. The cable's working out. And you're going through the same thing. Well, that's what I was doing. That's what I was doing to these guys that are experts, right? I was going through the same questions they've already dealt with, right? And to me, sitting there and going, okay, so what have you done so far? And then starting at the same point they're at provides better value, better efficiency of time, right? And also gets us on into a situation where we're starting to troubleshoot. It could be containment if it's an issue, troubleshoot, or look at remediation a lot faster than it would be if I sat there for half an hour asking questions that they've already done and already figured out, and they're already past that. They need that next level. So that's it for today's Daily Cyber. Look, there's like 5 minutes left. I hope you guys got a lot of value out of this. I hope this helped. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm really excited about keep doing these Daily Cybers and having just different conversations, and just really appreciate you guys and everything that you guys are doing. So don't forget, software's hackable, being connected is vulnerable. I'll see you next Daily Cyber.